The first official notice arrived on a Tuesday, slipped into the ornate, black iron mailbox that stood like a sentinel at the end of my gravel driveway. It was printed on crisp, cream-colored HOA letterhead, the embossed seal of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association gleaming under the late morning sun. I wiped my hands on my worn jeans, the earthy scent of soil and animal feed clinging to my skin, and unfolded the document with a sense of foreboding. The language was dense, legalistic, but the intent was clear as spring water. It was a notice of proposed amendment and special assessment, and it was aimed directly at my heart, my home, my menagerie. Section 7.4, Non-Traditional Domestic Fauna, it declared, shall hereby be subject to a tiered monthly residential animal surcharge, MRS. There was a chart. Chickens, $50 per bird, per month. Ducks, $75. Goats, $200. The single, aging dairy cow I kept for milk and companionship, Bessie, $500. There was a line item for beehive clusters and even one for composting worms. The justification was a masterpiece of suburban paranoia, potential property value depreciation, odor mitigation, noise abatement, and ethical community alignment. I looked up from the paper, my vision blurring for a moment before focusing on the scene behind it. My 10 acres, a stubborn, beautiful thumbprint of rustic chaos amid the manicured lawns and pseudo-Tuscan villas of Pinecrest Estates. The chickens scratched contentedly in their sun-dappled run, their soft brup-brup sounds a soothing rhythm. Gerald the goat stood majestically atop his favorite stump, surveying his kingdom. In the distance, Bessie lowed softly. This wasn't a hobby, it was my inheritance, my sanity, my life's work after the corporate world had spit me out, chewed up and disillusioned. My grandfather had bought this land when it was all just wild pines and hope. Now, it was an island, and the tide of HOA bylaws, led by its queen, Karen, was rising. Karen. Her full name was Karen Whitmore, but no one used it. She was the undisputed chairperson of the Pinecrest HOA, a woman whose personal aesthetic was corporate casual meets courtroom chic. She lived in the largest house on the cul-de-sac, a monument to beige stucco and aggressive landscaping. Her roses were never out of line. Her lawn was a monoculture of emerald green so perfect it looked photoshopped. She believed, with religious fervor, that uniformity was the highest virtue, and my farm, with its clucking, bleeding, glorious untidiness, was a heresy. I'd known this was coming. The cold, polite smiles at the rare HOA mixer I attended. The pointed comments about rustic charm and county living made as if they were compliments but landed like barbs. The friendly reminder about the unauthorized structure, the goat shed, that I had, in fact, permitted under the agricultural exemption grandfathered into my property's deed. Karen had been laying the groundwork for years, biding her time. The animal tax was her masterstroke. It wasn't designed to regulate, it was designed to eradicate. At these rates, I'd be bankrupt in 6 months. That evening, I sat at my heavy oak kitchen table, the notice before me, a cup of mint tea grown in my own herb garden steaming beside it. My dog, Barnaby, a shaggy mutt of indefinable origin, rested his head on my knee. "Well, old boy," I murmured, scratching behind his ears. "It seems the Empress of Eggshell White has declared war." The first battle was at the emergency HOA meeting, called to vote on the amendment. The community clubhouse smelled of lemon-scented polish and thinly veiled hostility. I arrived in clean work clothes, drawing stares from a sea of pastel polo shirts and designer athleisure. Karen presided from the head table, a gavel poised next to her insulated water bottle. She gave a PowerPoint presentation. Graphs showed correlations between non-conforming properties and stagnant resale values. Stock photos of dilapidated coupes were juxtaposed with glossy images of pristine Pinecrest homes. She spoke of collective responsibility and protecting our investment. When the floor opened for comments, I stood, my boots solid on the polished floor. "This isn't about property values," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is about targeting one household. My property has an agricultural easement. My animals are well-kept, healthy, and contained. They don't smell any worse than the chemical fertilizers sprayed on half the lawns here every week. This surcharge is a punitive measure, not a practical one." Karen offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We all must adapt for the greater good, Leo. Progress sometimes requires sacrifice from those clinging to older ways." The condescension dripped like toxic honey. The vote was a formality. My neighbors, some avoiding my gaze, others nodding along with Karen, passed the amendment. The MRAS was law, effective next month. Retreating wasn't an option. I fought back, but my initial salvo was bureaucratic. I filed a formal appeal, citing the agricultural exemption in my deed. Karen's response was a terse letter from the HOA's lawyer, a sleek man named Henderson, stating that HOA covenants superseded historical use and that the MRAS was a fee for services, unspecified services, not a property restriction, and thus perfectly legal. I researched local ordinances, but Pinecrest was an unincorporated community. The HOA's power, derived from signed covenants, was vast and largely unchallenged. The first bill came. $2,275 for the month. I didn't pay it. Instead, I launched Operation Sunflower. I had been planning to expand my pollinator gardens. Now, I did so with strategic vengeance. Along the entire border of my property, facing the street and Karen's house in particular, I planted a dense, towering wall of giant sunflowers and fast-growing, fragrant sweet peas. They were beautiful, cheerful, and utterly non-compliant with the low-profile, approved ornamental shrub list in the HOA bylaws. The violation notices started arriving. I ignored them. The fines mounted. I filed them in a drawer I labeled Karen's Folly. Then, I went on the offensive. Using my old skills from a former life in marketing, I started a blog and social media accounts, the Pinecrest Menagerie. Not as a protest, but as a celebration. I posted enchanting photos of Gerald's antics, close-ups of dew on spiderwebs in the chicken run, serene shots of Bessie at sunset. I wrote heartfelt, funny stories about the therapeutic value of collecting warm eggs, the simple satisfaction of goat cheese made from Gerald's milk, the symphony of sounds that was my morning. I didn't mention the HOA or Karen. Not directly. The response was slow, then exponential. People in our city, weary of sterile suburbs, loved it. Local news picked it up as a feel-good story about urban farming. A reporter came out, did a sweet piece. Karen was livid. Her control was based on quiet, private pressure. This was public, and it was making my little farm a local treasure. She retaliated by speeding up the lien process for my unpaid MRAS and fines, and by enforcing every bylaw against me with terrifying precision. The height of my grass. The unapproved color of my barn door, it was red, a classic, beautiful red. The public nuisance of a rooster crowing at dawn, his name was Chanticleer, and his crow was magnificent. The pressure was immense. The legal letters piled up. Henderson threatened foreclosure proceedings. I was spending my savings on a lawyer of my own, a weary but brilliant older woman named Martha who specialized in property law. "They're bullies, Leo," she said, peering over her glasses. "But they're bullies with a signed contract. Your grandfather agreed to the HOA covenants when the development went up around him. The agricultural angle is our best shot, but it's shaky." One rainy afternoon, feeling the walls close in, I found myself in the old barn, seeking solace. Barnaby followed, nosing my hand. As I leaned against Bessie's warm flank, listening to the rain on the metal roof, my hand brushed against a loose board in the wall. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a tin box. Inside, I found my grandfather's journals. And in the journal from the year the HOA was formed, I found gold. He wrote in a firm, no-nonsense hand. "Met with the developers today. Smooth-talking fellows. Want to make this whole area cohesive. They're pushing this homeowners association paperwork." I told them I'm a farmer, not a suburbanite. They said I could keep farming, but had to sign. I made them add an addendum. Page 14, Clause 7. Got it in writing, the agricultural use of Lot 42, the old Henderson parcel, shall be considered a permitted, non-conforming use in perpetuity, exempt from aesthetic or density-based assessments, provided core agricultural activities are maintained. They signed. I signed. Hope I didn't just sell my soul for a mess of pottage. My heart hammered against my ribs. In perpetuity. Exempt from aesthetic or density-based assessments. The MRAS was, by its very definition, a density-based assessment. Karen and Henderson had either never seen this addendum, or they had deliberately ignored it. This was the sword I needed. I didn't confront Karen immediately. I went to Martha. She scanned the document, a slow grin spreading across her face. "Oh, this is beautiful, Leo. This isn't just a clause, it's a shield and a spear." The annual HOA meeting was the chosen battlefield. It was a grand affair, held at the country club. Karen was in her element, delivering a State of the Pinecrest address full of smug satisfaction about increased property values and community standards being upheld. She mentioned, with full regret, ongoing non-compliance issues that were being dealt with through proper legal channels. When she called for new business, I stood. I was wearing a jacket, for once. Madam Chairwoman, I said, my voice carrying in the hushed room. I have a point of order regarding the recently enacted monthly residential animal surcharge, as applied to my property. Karen sighed, a performance of long-suffering patience. Leo, this matter is with our attorneys. It's not for open discussion. I believe it is, I said, pulling out copies of the addendum. I handed one to Karen, one to the stunned-looking HOA secretary, and began passing others to the front row. This is an addendum to the original Pinecrest covenants, signed by the developers and my grandfather, Samuel Clay. It explicitly grants Lot 42, my property, an agricultural exemption in perpetuity, specifically exempting it from assessments based on the density or aesthetic impact of its agricultural activities. The MRAS is a textbook density-based assessment. Therefore, it does not apply to me. A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's face, for the first time in public, lost its composed mask. She stared at the paper, her eyes darting back and forth. This is irrelevant. This was superseded by the Unified Community Bylaws of 2010. Martha, who I had asked to attend as my guest, stood up. I'm Martha Reeves, attorney for Mr. Clay. That is incorrect. The 2010 bylaws reaffirmed all existing, legally recorded covenants and addenda. This document is legally binding. If you attempt to enforce the MRAS against Mr. Clay, we will not only seek an injunction, but we will file a lawsuit for harassment, abusive process, and willful violation of a recorded property right. We will also seek discovery on all HOA communications regarding this matter. She let the thread hang in the air. Discovery would mean emails, texts, possibly revealing Karen's personal vendetta. The meeting descended into chaos. Homeowners began asking questions. Some were angry at me for causing trouble. But others, perhaps tired of Karen's reign, or perhaps secretly charmed by the menagerie blog, started questioning the fairness. Did you know about this, Karen? Why are we spending HOA funds on a legal fight against a founding document? Karen sputtered, tried to regain control, but the foundation of her scheme was cracking. The vote to repeal the MRAS entirely failed, but a motion to exempt properties with pre-existing, legally documented agricultural rights passed by a narrow, shocking margin. It was a conditional victory. My farm was safe. For now. But Karen was not one to surrender. Defeated on the legal front, she turned to the social. The cold smiles turned to icy glares. My children, though I had none, were subtly shunned at the community pool. Rumors started about disease from the animals, about my mental stability. It was a whispering campaign, designed to isolate and poison the well. My countermove was one of pure, unadulterated joy. I announced, on my blog and with flyers at the local library and coffee shop, the first annual Pinecrest Menagerie Fall Festival. Free entry. Pumpkin painting for kids. Goat petting. Fresh apple cider from a local orchard. A display of heritage chicken breeds. I invited the whole neighborhood, personally handing beautifully designed invitations to every house, including Karen's. The day of the festival dawned clear and golden. I was a nervous wreck. What if no one came? What if Karen succeeded in scaring them off? They came. In droves. Cars lined the gravel road. Families, couples, curious teenagers streamed onto my land. The air filled with laughter, not the sterile quiet of Pinecrest. Kids chased chickens, gently, their squeals of delight music to my ears. Gerald was in his glory, accepting admirers and the occasional carrot. People asked questions about composting, about raising chickens, about the simple, tangible satisfaction of it all. They bought my honey, my eggs, my goat cheese. They saw the sunflowers, not as a violation, but as a glorious wall of happiness. And then, midway through the afternoon, I saw her. Karen Whitmore, standing at the edge of the crowd, wearing stark white jeans and a look of profound confusion. She was not participating. She was observing, like an anthropologist studying a strange tribe. Our eyes met across the bustling yard. I gave a small, polite nod. She did not return it. She just watched as her neighbor, Mrs. Greeley from 2 streets over, giggled while a duck waddled over her feet. She saw Mr. Henderson, the lawyer's teenage son, smiling as he held a chick carefully in his cupped hands. She didn't stay long. But she had seen it. The community she claimed to protect, connecting, laughing, and thriving on the very land she had tried to sanitize into submission. The festival was a seismic shift. The whispers didn't stop entirely, but they were drowned out by a new narrative, the charming local farm that had won a David and Goliath battle. New friendships were forged over goat cheese samples. A few neighbors even asked for advice on starting their own small compost bins or bee-friendly gardens. The final confrontation was quieter than I expected. A week after the festival, a certified letter arrived. It was from the Pinecrest HOA, signed by the full board. Karen's name was listed, but not as the sole signatory. It stated that after review, the board had voted to formally acknowledge the agricultural addendum and to apply all future bylaws with consideration for its protected status. It was a surrender, wrapped in legalese. A few days later, I saw Karen walking her impeccably groomed Bichon Frise past my property line. The wall of sunflowers was now a cascade of yellow and green. She paused, looking at them. Not with anger, but with something that looked like weary acceptance. Perhaps she saw them for what they were, not a barrier, but a boundary. A beautiful, living declaration that some things, like the right to a little piece of earth, to the company of creatures, to a life that isn't dictated by a color swatch, are worth fighting for. I walked over to the fence, Barnaby at my heel. "Morning, Karen," I said, my tone neutral. She jumped slightly, then composed herself. "Leo." She looked from the sunflowers to my face. "Your event was quite popular." "It was," I agreed. "The community seemed to enjoy it." A long silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of bees in the clover. The Bichon strained at its leash towards Barnaby, who wagged his tail amiably. "They're not so bad, are they?" I said softly, nodding toward the animals. "The sounds. The smell of hay. It's just life." Karen looked at her perfect dog, then at my muddy boots, then out over the farm where a child's laughter from the weekend still seemed to echo. She didn't apologize. She didn't concede. That wasn't her nature. But she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not of friendship, but of a truce. An acknowledgement of a stalemate between two fundamentally different versions of what a home should be. "Good day, Leo," she said finally, and walked on, her heels clicking a precise rhythm on the pavement. I watched her go, then turned back to my land. Chanticleer crowed, a triumphant sound in the clean morning air. Gerald bleated, demanding breakfast. Bessie waited patiently by the gate. The war was over. The farm, with all its beautiful, noisy, messy, perfect life, was safe. I had fought back with the only weapons that mattered, truth, joy, and a stubborn refusal to let my little patch of earth be taxed into silence. And I had won.